What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a bit about the Minnesota Timberwolves. Right now, they're in the midst of potentially the best season in franchise history. They've got a record of 39-16, which has them at the first spot in the Western Conference here at the All-Star break, and this is a really tough Western Conference. To be at this spot this far in is extremely impressive. They're on pace for 58 wins, which would tie the most wins by any Wolves team ever, alongside the 2003-2004 squad, and there's still 27 games left to play, and they've already got the 13th best win total in Timberwolves history. They're only 3 wins away from tying last year's total. They're for sure going to get to 50 wins, and that's only happened 5 times in the history of the franchise. This team is doing things that not a lot of Timberwolves squads have ever accomplished. If they continue on this pace, they're going to try and rival that 2003-2004 squad as the best team that the Wolves have ever seen. Now, that team did go to the Western Conference Finals and also had Kevin Garnett, one of the best players of all time, so trying to take the title away from that team is going to require a lot of playoff success, which the Timberwolves really haven't had in recent franchise history. In fact, they haven't had it in 20 years. Since that 2003-2004 team, the Minnesota Timberwolves have not won a first-round series. It's been 20 years to the year. Now, over that stretch, they did have a few playoff appearances here and there, some first-round exits, and some really tough-fought series, but it didn't amount to a second-round appearance. If there's one team, though, that is going to break this curse in the modern era, it's going to be the squad that has continuously looked like one of the best teams in the league over this entire first 2/3 of the season, roughly. In addition to having the second best record in the NBA at this point, the Wolves are also first in defensive rating by a pretty significant margin over the second spot Cleveland Cavaliers. They're 17th in offense and have a 7.0 net rating, which is third, only behind the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Boston Celtics. Defense has been the calling card for this team, as you could probably tell, and the focal point of that has been Rudy Gobert, who this season alone has completely vindicated the Wolves in trading so much for him and vindicated anybody who believed in the Rudy Gobert trade. I'm someone who really liked it when it happened. Last year, I definitely faltered and thought, hey, maybe they made a mistake, but this year, they're back. They have looked amazing with Rudy Gobert out there on the court, and he's been one of the most impactful players in the entire league this season, never mind on the Wolves themselves. He's been putting up a typical Rudy Gobert stat line, 13.7 points per game, 12.5 rebounds, 1.2 assists, and 2.1 blocks, while shooting 64.7% from the field. He's almost certainly going to win Defensive Player of the Year. If it went to anybody else, I'd be genuinely shocked. He has been the best defender in the entire league so far, locking down on that interior in particular. I mean, if you just take a look at his B-ball index page, it's absurd. A+ rim deterrence, A+ in percent of rim shots contested, every metric down the line. He has been an A or an A+. He's blowing every other interior defender out of the water, and he does hold his own in the perimeter better than most people give him credit for. But even though he's not the best perimeter defender, what he does in the interior is such a game changer that in and of itself is worthy of getting the Defensive Player of the Year. He's anchoring the best defense in the world. He's giving them amazing minutes. He's also an elite rebounder, closing out possessions on that defensive end and giving the Wolves some second opportunities on the offensive end. He's number 2 in both total offensive and defensive rebounds this season. He's the key cog. Without him, this entire team would completely fall apart. He's the focus of their best aspect, and I really don't know how many wins this team actually has if Rudy Gobert wasn't out there. If you just replaced him with an average center, this team, I think, would plummet down the standings. He's not alone, though, I will say, on that defensive end. He is aided by some other great defenders like Jaden McDaniels, who is incredible, especially on the perimeter, gives him a lot of length, and I would expect him to be in all defensive talks. Anthony Edwards has continuously improved as a defender, often being tasked with some pretty tough assignments and giving them problems. There have been a number of times this year where Ant has said, I want to go ahead and guard the opposing team's best player, give me this matchup, and he's locked up a lot of times in the final minutes of games. Mike Conley holds up on that end. Karl Anthony-Towns is playing the best defense of his career. I've been very impressed by how he's held up, and I think a lot of that does go to Rudy Gobert's credit. The fact that he has another big of that caliber next to him allows him to make some more mistakes, and they don't completely fall apart because of that. And that is pretty much the case for the entire team. People can make defensive breakdowns, but because Rudy is in the back line, it doesn't matter that much. But while defensively they've been incredible, offensively it has been a bit of an up and down season. As I mentioned, just 17th in offensive rating. However, they do have some big names who are doing some pretty impressive stuff on that offensive end. Anthony Edwards in particular has been amazing this season. He secured an all-star spot, putting up career highs almost across the board. 26.2 points per game, 47% from the field, 38.6% from deep, 5.2 boards, 4.2 assists, 1.2 steals. It's the highest point per game, field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, and assist mark of his entire career. He's becoming one of the league's better scorers. He's an incredibly dynamic finisher around the rim, whether he's utilizing finesse or his explosive athleticism. Does not get enough credit for some of the crazy finishes that he makes. Of course, can also absolutely destroy you value at the rim if you try to block his shot. He can dunk on anybody. We've seen that a number of times. He's got a float game. He's a good isolation player. He's able to go get you buckets in the half court. A high-level three-point shooter, super dangerous in transition. Pretty much anywhere you put Anthony Edwards, he can go ahead and get you buckets in droves. And this is, of course, in combination with the defensive improvement I talked about, which has turned him into one of the league's brightest young stars. Additionally, when we talk about this team's prospect going forward to the playoffs, which I've seen a lot of people question, one of the bright spots for them is that every time Anthony Edwards has been to the playoffs, he's been really good. Specifically last year against the reigning champion Denver Nuggets, he put on a show, dropping 31.6 points per game, 5 boards and 5.2 assists to go with 1.8 steals and 2 blocks per game while shooting 48% from the field and 35% from deep with just 1.6 turnovers per game. He gave the Nuggets hell. A number of Nuggets players said that Anthony Edwards was one of the toughest players that they went up against, and if he has a similar rise this season with now a better supporting cast and a more cohesive squad, then it's really scary for opposing teams. Really, there are only a couple of concerns I even have about Ant's game at this point. The first one is the shot selection. He takes some really bad shots sometimes, and I mean sometimes they go down because he's ridiculously good, but there are some nights where he just doesn't really have it. He's forcing up shots a lot rather than deferring, not going to the basket and settling for these really deep threes. He definitely needs to improve that a little bit, and I think that'll come over time. He's a really young player, still kind of figuring out how to beat this one option, when to balance aggression with playmaking, and there have been some strides that he's made so far this season. One thing I will say, though, in addition to that, is the turnovers continue to be a problem for him. There's been a number of times where I feel like he's driven into the paint, left the ground, and doesn't have anywhere to go with the ball, or he loses it on the way up. It's resulted in a lot of pretty bad turnovers, and honestly, turnovers, not even just for Anthony Edwards, are a big problem for the Minnesota Timberwolves themselves. That's probably the biggest problem this team has at the moment. They've got the 4th highest turnover percentage in the NBA, and they're top 6 in total turnovers per game. It's a prevailing issue for them. And they've survived for a majority of the season despite these problems. You know, they've got this great defense, they've got some star power. Most of the time, they just brute force their way to wins. But there have been a couple of times here and there when they play some of the top teams in the league where these turnover issues really come to bite them. And when you get to the playoffs in a Western Conference, that there's really going to be no easy rounds. Every team that you play is going to give you some challenges and some problems. You can't afford to be giving them all these extra scoring possessions. Even though you're a phenomenal defense and can clamp down on a lot of those chances, you still don't want to give them away, especially because the Timberwolves already struggle to score with the best of them. They're below average offensively, so you can't be throwing away any offensive possessions. You need to make the most of all of them. And so I do worry about that a little bit for them in the playoffs, because if they just start getting into turnover problems, I could see it snowballing. One guy that doesn't have these turnover issues is Mike Conley, who's been incredible for the Wolves this season. Actually, today as I'm recording this, just got a 2-year extension, which he's very deserving of, giving them 10.6 points per game, 2.9 rebounds, and 6.2 dimes along with a steal, while shooting 44.2% from 3. I swear, I feel like I haven't seen Mike Conley miss this entire season. Like, I know I have, but every moment where they really need a 3, Mike Conley is always there and he's always going to knock it down. He's also got the 2nd best assist to turnover ratio out of any player in the league so far this season, only behind Tyus Jones, who's kind of known for that. He's a great orchestrator of the offense, one of the biggest reasons why the Wolves offense has managed to stay afloat a lot of these times. Played a lot of games recently with Mike Conley out of the lineup, and you could really see the difference. He is super important for this team, and again, like I said, very deserving of getting that extension, because without him, I don't know where this Wolves offense would be at. Another guy who's having a great season is Karl Anthony-Towns. He just made the All-Star game and put up 50 points in it, and this is coming after there were a lot of trade rumors surrounding him in the offseason. A lot of people saying, hey, maybe they should break up this duo by trading away Cat, who for a while was the face of the franchise, and he's answered a lot of the doubters. 22.5 points per game, 8.4 rebounds, and 2.9 assists, while shooting 51.7% from the field and 43.7% from deep. He's just 2.2 percentage points in free throw percentage away from a 50-40-90 season, putting up over 20 points per game. And this comes, of course, with the improved defense that I talked about. He's been really solid on that end. I'm super interested to see how he plays in the playoffs, because while he's having a great season so far, historically has not been a playoff performer. His averages have almost consistently dropped across the board when he's gotten to the playoffs, and they're really going to need that offensive production. They cannot afford anybody to drop off, and Cat is one of the guys that they really need to elevate his game. One other guy who they could use some elevation from is Jaden McDaniels, because as good as he's been defensively this year, like I said, maybe an all-defensive player, I was hoping for a bit more from him offensively. Now, it is kind of hard with Ant continuing to emerge as a superstar, and his point per game average steadily declining. You know, the presence of Karl Anthony-Towns there, Gobert, Mike Conley. There's a lot of mouths to feed, but I still was hoping for a bit of a jump here from Jaden McDaniels to see him be a little bit more versatile offensively and just more efficient across the board. He's giving them 10.7 points per game, 2.7 rebounds, and 1.3 assists, and he's shooting above 50% from the field, which is the 2nd highest mark of his career, but the 3-point percentage is down from 39.8% last year to just 35.7%, which is still fine. but they're going to need him to knock down those three-point shots consistently. He's probably going to get a lot of looks with all the pressure going to Cat and Anthony Edwards, and he's got to hit those shots in the playoffs. Again, they need all the offense they could get, so getting Jaden McDaniels back closer to 40% rather than 35% would be big. He's got the second half of the season to hopefully kind of refine that rhythm. I guess we'll see if he does. Overall, though, this is a good three-point shooting team. They're third in the NBA in three-point percentage, although they do shoot the seventh least number of threes, so they knock them down when they shoot them, but they don't shoot a lot of them. That is because, they've got both Cat and Rudy Gobert down low, so they're operating a lot more inside. They've got a lot of size, so most often they kind of just take it to the basket, but it is good to know that if they're going to shoot those threes, they'll probably go ahead and knock them down. The supporting cast surrounding these starting five guys is also pretty good. Naz Reid is one of the best bench players in the entire NBA, giving them 12.2 points per game and 4.6 boards, and shooting 41.8% from three. Having him, Cat, and Rudy Gobert as a big man trio is legitimately insane. There is no big man trio that is better than those three in the league. Gilgeous-Alexander Walker has become really solid for them over time, giving them 7 points per game, shooting 38% from deep with some really solid defense. Also, picked up Monte Morris at the deadline, who theoretically could be a really good addition to this team. They're looking for another ball handler, someone else who can play make without turning it over much, can knock down some threes, and that is theoretically the mold of player that Monte Morris has been for a while, but so far this season hasn't exactly been that player. Now he's only played 9 games, 6 over there in Detroit, now 3 in Minnesota, and he's really struggled. His three-point shooting has been way down. He doesn't look as good as he has in the past, but he's coming off a big injury, so I'm going to give him the rest of the season to kind of figure it out, and hopefully he gets back to the Monte Morris of old, and if he does, that's a big-time pickup for this Wolves team that I think could really help them when they get to the playoffs. One guy who hasn't been great as part of the supporting cast is Karl Anderson. The defense is solid, and he does give them 4.1 assists per game, but the lack of shooting has really hurt this team's spacing, just 21.9% from three, with that very unorthodox three-point shooting form. I don't know if Karl Anderson is long for this team, and to be honest, in the playoffs, I could see him getting moved out of the rotation entirely. Speaking of the playoffs, the Wolves are one of the more intriguing teams when we eventually get to that point. There's a big debate in NBA circles right now about whether or not this team are frauds, whether they're contenders, are they somewhere in the middle where they could theoretically make the finals, but a bit more of a dark horse, whether they need one more piece or just overall experience. Everybody has varied opinions. Me personally, they're not my pick to come out of the Western Conference. They'd probably be like 3rd or 4th in my ranking, but I do think they have the personnel to be the team that comes out of the West. I think they are championship contenders. I made a video not too long ago where I covered other people's hot takes, and the title of that video was that the Timberwolves are frauds, but I thought I made it clear that that was a hot take someone else said that I was reacting to, and so now I think a lot of people think I hate the Timberwolves. I don't. I think this team is really good. They're capable of way more than people are giving them credit for, and I just don't think a lot of people have quite realized that yet. To get to that point, though, they are going to have to cut down on some of those turnovers. They really need to ramp up the offense going into the playoffs, figure out how to score consistently in that slowed down setting, and I do worry about that against some of the better defensive teams out there in the Western Conference because there are some really good ones, but I do think the Wolves have some unique advantages of their own, and the one in particular that stands out to me is their size. In a world where a lot of teams have gone kind of more small ball, the Wolves have fully embraced big ball. They play Cat at the 4, Jaden McDaniels is near 7 feet tall at the 3, Gobert is of course out there, Naz Reid comes off the bench. This team has a lot of size and physicality. They can destroy you on the boards, they can make things really difficult to score because there's so many guys that are just super lengthy out there, and I think that's going to give a lot of teams problems. The only team that comes really even close to them in terms of size in the Western Conference are the Denver Nuggets, who they gave a really tough series to last year without Jaden McDaniels or Naz Reid. Also, Anthony Edwards seems to be someone who can rise in the playoffs. Again, we've seen it a couple of times. We'll have to see if that's sustainable for a full playoff run, but I do think Ant can be amazing in the playoffs and take them to the next level, and that combined with the size makes them a really unique challenge to overcome. I'm really interested to see what they can do in the playoffs. I know there are a lot of people doubting them. We'll see if they can overcome those doubters. The good thing about this team, though, is they've got a lot of their guys locked up long term, so even if they don't win this year, they've still got a pretty bright future ahead of them. Like, Ant is only 22 years old and he's already doing all this crazy stuff. Give him some more time, he's going to be one of the best players in the world. Cat is only 28, so he's not regressing probably anytime soon. Gobert is 31, so he's getting a bit up there in age, but is probably still going to be one of the best rim protectors in the world, at least for next season. Jaden McDaniels is just 23, Naz Reid's only 24, Nikhil's only 25. Mike Conley's getting up there in age, but he's got a game that I think will age perfectly fine. Like, this team's still got some years ahead of them. Now, one thing that is concerning is they're paying this team a lot of money, so say they go out there and flop in the playoffs this year, they're probably going to have to make a trade, whether it's involving Jaden McDaniels, maybe it is is the Karl Anthony-Towns trade, so that's one big thing to keep an eye on. But of course, that doesn't matter too much for the moment. It's just interesting because that second apron, they're going to get pretty close to that. In fact, I'm pretty sure they are already going to be over it without adding any extra pieces in the offseason going into next year. So they've got to really make sure this is a group that can win. We're going to see in the playoffs. I'm excited to see what they can do. Let me know down below in the comments what your takeaway is about the Minnesota Timberwolves. Do you think they're a championship contender? Do you think they're frauds? Or do you think they're maybe somewhere in between, like a dark horse that you just don't believe that much in? As always, though, I appreciate you watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.